Excited to share with you again. Last night we discussed what it meant to be an all-in man, kind of what that looks like, where it begins.
Good job, man.
That's right, brother. I'm going to like you. Yeah. It's your birthday? Well, happy birthday. What's your name? James? We're glad you're here, brother. Okay, I hope all of you are just like James this morning. It'll make this way more fun.
Amen. I'm going to say amen every day.
Don't quit, brother. Don't quit. Amen. Except for a few minutes, maybe. Okay.
I was baptized July 9th.
There we go. Thank you, brother. Thank you. Yeah. And we have opportunities for you to be baptized today, just so you know that. And I want you to know that if you're looking for that opportunity, come talk to one of us about that. If there's something moving in your heart and you're ready to make that outward profession of your faith through baptism, would you please come talk to me or one of the leaders here? We would love to know that. I'd love to be a part of that expression of your faith. I want to challenge you to something this morning, and it's this. I want to challenge you as you're walking around this place today to take an opportunity to do something. Have a meaningful spiritual conversation with somebody else. What I have come to learn is men don't know how to do that. Predominantly because we have an ABT issue, we ain't been taught. And you know that's true. You have to be taught and trained how to have spiritual conversations. Otherwise, they feel foreign to you and awkward. But the great part about places like this is that theoretically, you should be free to have that conversation literally with anybody, even a stranger.
Amen.
And you know why? It's easier to have that conversation with strangers because there's no risk there.
Amen.
You're weird and they're weird together. And that makes it okay. So you can talk to anybody at this camp for the next 24 to 36 hours about anything, relatively anything. Don't be weird.
Why not?
But be open and transparent and real and just lean into it a little bit. Because it's right there that you learn that you are not so different from anybody else. And while they may be a little weird and you might be a little weird, it's leaning into that moment where you discover friendship and relationship, brotherhood, the Spirit, God begins to work, and inside of your story and their story, you see His story,
Amen.
Which is the best story ever written. So lean into that for me today. Don't get so overexcited about the activities that you miss the moment to do that. Because those activities, they don't mean anything without a conversation about Jesus.
Amen.
So today, we're going to be looking at desires and what it means for us as men to live all in with our desires for Him. So, February 2020, if you remember that moment, there's this thing that swept the earth. And all of a sudden, all my speaking engagements were canceled. 9 months of them, by the way, which was horrific. But then I decided, by a prompting of God's Spirit, to do something that I was a little bit scared of doing. I put this little button on my website that said, "Need prayer." It's still there today. It's right on the top of the web page, right on the toolbar there. You can get to it. And I put up this opportunity for men to write in and to share their prayer requests with me. I was scared of it because at the moment in time, the entire staff team was me. And I didn't really know what to do about that because there are quite a few visitors that listen to some of the things that I do on a daily basis. And I didn't know how men were going to respond. So men start trickling in and they start writing and I start reading these prayers and I start writing prayers back to them at first, and then I started recording prayers that I sent to them. And then eventually that turned into a prayer movement of men that's led by a little over 50 guys that pray on a continual basis for these men that write in prayer requests to us all day long, 24 hours a day. And I learned something about men through this experiment, which is what it was. Through this experiment of hearing requests from men, I came to discover that there are only 5 things that men pray about. 5. And I'm going to list them to you in order of how often I got the prayer requests. You may want to write these down. Number 1 prayer request from men across the planet, after hundreds of thousands of prayers have been prayed by men, number 1 is marriage. They hit a moment in their marriage where they got busted and caught by something, and now they know that they were wrong. And they desperately need prayer. Sometimes these prayers look like chicken scratch. Sometimes they're long paragraphs with stories. Sometimes they're just heartfelt confessions. But these men are desperately confused, and guess what? They actually want their marriage to work. Amen. Praise God for that. But I want to let you know, every time I read one of those, it terrified me and broke my heart, even though I was excited to pray for these men. Second on the list, compulsions and repetitive sin. Of course, whatever kind of addiction you can come up with, we men, we figured out how to get addicted to that thing. Pornography, drugs, alcohol, gambling, anger, go down the list. You know what it is because you got one of those problems too, right? Third on the list, finances. They've got themselves into financial problems and issues that they can't reconcile right now because they have accumulated a mound of debt, poor decisions, bought too much, got addicted to things in this world, and now they are trying to figure out their way out and they can't. Number 4, health. Remarkably, during COVID, it was health, okay? But it wasn't just COVID. It was my hip is bad, my back hurts, I got perpetual pain in my neck, I have sinus infections to headaches. I mean, you name it. I got just about everything on the health spectrum from the end of the toe to the top of the head. I've heard it all in a prayer request. Health. 5th on the list was this, vision and calling. What is God's plan for my life? I lost my job. I don't know what to do. I don't know what his plan is for me. I need a calling. I need some direction from God. Only 5 prayer requests. That's it. You know what that made me an expert at? Praying 5 total prayers. Really good at it. But I want you to know this. Those are real needs that men actually have. But here's the sad part about most of those prayers. Most of those prayers revealed one thing to me about men, is that they want the pain removed. But they don't want to deal with the problem that led to the pain. They want God to answer, but they don't want to deal with the problem. They want God to provide a miracle, but they're unwilling to really let God into the deep confines of their heart, where their life can really deal with the core problem that led them to those mistakes in the first place. Let me give you an example of it. I have 3 kids, and the youngest one's name is Riley. And a number of years ago, he was probably about 16 or so, we were at home. He was down at a neighbor's house. And Riley is kind of a unique kid, all right? He was never very good at high school. He barely got through high school. I mean, by barely, I mean 1.3 grade point average. He's dyslexic. He has a very difficult time reading, but he has remarkable gifts. Remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. He has what I call the David complex. He's incredibly good looking. He's very athletic. Women love him, and he was a leader in his school. In fact, in ninth grade, we continued to get called into the principal's office time and time and time again because of his behavioral issues, because he's always pushing the limits on everything. Everything. Every single thing. After continually getting called into the principal's office in high school in ninth grade, finally, the principal and the assistant principal called us in to have a conversation with us. They set us down after the fifth time and finally said to us, "Hey, will you tell us a story about Riley?" I'm like, "What story is to tell? He's been in here 5 times. You know his story. He's as frustrating to me as he probably is to you." And he says, "Well, actually, no." He said, "Riley has an incredible power to be able to lead. And while you don't know this, we actually call him into the office to help us reconcile issues happening with the student body." I was like, huh? Later, Riley smiled about the thing because he knew what he's up to the entire time. In fact, we were so troubled by him at a very young age, we took him in to a counselor, a psychologist to have him tested, got an IQ test, came to discover that even though he has a 1.3 grade point average, his IQ is 165. It's a very tiny percent of the population, like really tiny. Like the psychologist said to us, when I did this study on him, which by the way, I've been a psychologist for 30 years, I turned pages on this IQ book that I've never seen before. And if you understand how an IQ test works, you keep turning pages until they fail a test and then you close it. She said, "I saw 20 pages I've never seen before in my life after 30 years. And she showed me one of them and said, "Here's the problem. Can you answer that?" And I can't even read the question. And how did he read the question? Because he can't read all that great. Well, this is my son, all right? So now here comes a moment for you. 15, 16 years old, he's down at a neighbor's house with a bunch of girls. Remember, he's kind of a little bit of a womanizer, all right? We've been working on that for a long time. He's down at their house, and he's with these girls, and there's stuff going on, and I don't really know what's going on, but, they're hanging out, and the parents are home, so I'm trusting the situation. And it gets to be about 10 o'clock at night, and we hear Riley come into the house. But I'm a father of 3 kids. He's the youngest, so I can kind of tell when something isn't right with one of my kids. It's like, when you can smell that smell in the fridge, and you know something's wrong, and you got to go find what that smell is and get it out of the fridge because it disturbs you to death. It needs to be removed. That's what happened. The way that he came into the house was weird. Me and my wife were up in bed together, and I heard the door open and how he came in, and I looked over at my wife and I said, "That is not right. What just happened is right." And she agreed. So, because I'm the man of the house and I'm trying to impress my wife, because we were in bed, by the way, I went down to try to handle the situation. So I go down to try to figure out what was going on, and I walk into his room, and I look him in the eye, and I go, "Son, is everything okay?" And he goes, "Yeah, Dad, everything's great." I go, "Are you sure?" And he goes, Yeah. I got to deal with some things here, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to pick up my room, and then I'm going to hit the sack. I go, "Okay, great." So I go back up to bed, feeling like the man of the house, right? Ready to slip back under the sheets with my wife, feeling really good about myself for about 10 minutes. Don't take that too far, all right? 10 minutes later, we get a phone call, all right, from the neighbor down the street. I pick up the call. This woman starts screaming at me. Some of you have been in this situation before with your kids. You know what this is like. It's a little bit of a surprise. It's hard to handle. It's hard to understand what to say back. But I started asking questions about what went on, and she told me such and such with this and that and the other thing. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter. But Riley did something he shouldn't have done. I turned over to my wife and I said, "Just like we thought, something in the fridge was stinky, so I need to go down and deal with it." So I said, "No, don't worry, honey, stay here. I'll go handle this thing." All right? I said, "But if something goes wrong and I don't come up in about 15 minutes, why don't you come on down?" All right? So on my way downstairs, I think to myself, I'm going to handle this I'm going to handle this like a good father, and I'm going to give my son an opportunity to confess it. Because, by the way, we have an ABT issue. We ain't been taught how to deal with sin. So I'm hoping that by me giving him an opportunity to confess sin to me, that it would teach him how to deal with it. So I go downstairs and I walk into his room and I play soft dad at first, where I tell him I know something's off, but I'm not going to tell him that this woman down the street has called me because I want to try to draw it out of him. This goes on for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and I'm getting nowhere fast, all right? I'm beginning to feel like a failure because I'm on a clock, fellas. I got 15 minutes to impress my wife, who I know is going to come down that stairs. I hear her walking down the stairs, and I turn to hard dad. This is where we start to use a little bit of shame and start to get a little strong, and I start to come at him a little bit, and that's when my wife is standing in the doorway. I'm coming at him kind of strong, hoping that maybe he's going to open up around this thing because maybe strong dad can draw this out of him. This goes on another 15 minutes, by the way, with my wife standing there watching me fail at this moment. And then I become exhausted. I become so exhausted that what I did was I pulled up a seat next to him on the bed and I sat down next to him. And I looked up at my wife and I just basically said, I don't know what to do. I gave up and I looked over at my son and I said, I'm giving up with you, but I need you to know, we know something went on at that house. I know what it is, and you need to start talking. Well, all of a sudden in this moment, my son's demeanor just begins to change just a little bit. And he says to me, because he's smart, he says to me, okay, Dad, I'll tell you what it is, but you can't tell anybody about it and you can't do anything about it. I was like, all right, we're making propositions here. What are we doing here? He's like bartering, like in the middle of his own sin, right? He's bartering with me, and because I knew what he did and I knew what he was going to do, I made the agreement with him. Because I knew a way around it, because I'm smart enough to kind of out-persuade him. I know the situation right now, so I kind of know what's going on. So I said, why don't you go ahead and tell us? And he told us, and he began to tell us the details of it and kind of what had happened. And I watched him as he told us. His face changed, his demeanor changed, his voice changed, his attitude changed. And then I did something with him next that he did not expect. I put my arm around him, and I said, thank you. That's what godly men do. They face into their sin. They meet it with confession. They get right with God, and they make it right. Do you understand? Yes, he said, I understand. It's hard to teach a man how to direct his desires in a way that glorify God. The way most men deal with sin is behavior modification and hoping to appease that sin. Behavior modification does not deal with sin, because the only thing that actually deals with sin is Jesus Christ. His death on the cross and his resurrection from the grave. What we have to come to terms with is that our desires lead us down the way of sin into failure in our life, and modifying our behaviors or even absolving that sin is not enough. We've got to deal with our wayward desires, and the only one that can deal with those wayward desires is Jesus Christ. I just want you to know that if you're here today and you've been dealing with a repetitive sin, I want to let you know that there is hope for you. If you have been dealing with addiction and compulsions, I want you to know that by the power of God and His Spirit, that you can overcome those things. Because for the man of God, those things have no longer control over you. But I promise you, there are going to be moments that you feel like they do. And I want you to know that you are normal. Because you're not the only one that's ever felt that way. Paul the Apostle has felt that way. Listen to his words right here in Romans chapter 7, verse 18. Romans 7, verse 18. Verse 18 reads this, "For I know that nothing good dwells in me, that is, in my flesh. For I have the desire to do what is right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil that I do not want is what I keep on doing. Now, if I do what I do not want, it is no longer I who do it, but sin that dwells in me. So I find it to be a law. When I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God, but in my inner being, but I see in my members another law, waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" I love that Paul put that in Romans chapter 7. Because guess what? If he can experience this, then that makes you and me normal. It makes us ordinary men. It makes us men who are dealing with a battle in our flesh. And we're just trying to find our way out. Now, I want you to know this. I have talked with and spoken with and counseled so many men that I can tell you that there's a behavior pattern that men get into that leads to those 5 prayer requests. My son did it through his example that I just shared with you right now, and this is how most men respond. Here's what happens. They have a desire. And this desire wells up in them. Desires and passions are actually something that God gave to you. They can have an ugly end and they can have a glorifying end. But for us in the flesh, they have an ugly end. These desires, then we act upon them. And when we act upon them, we suddenly discover whether those desires were good or bad. That's the way we learn, is by making mistakes and experiencing pain, unfortunately. That is the world and the flesh that we live in. The bad part about these desires for us in the flesh is they have an unfortunate and sinful end, and we continue to act on them. The problem is that we continue these desires and to act on them because we are really good at pretending, at hiding, at concealing. And guess what? You don't have to train a man how to do these 3 things. My son understood how to do this on that bed in that room that night. No one ever taught him how to do that. He had desires that he acted on, and then he pretended and hid and concealed those things. What I was trying to do is draw him out of the darkness to help him to see his actions and the desire. But most men continue doing this cycle because, again, listen carefully, you do not have to train a man how to do this. You are born in the flesh, and you know how to seek after fleshly desires and actions. Here's the problem with it. Once you hide and pretend and conceal once, you will do it again. Because it worked the first time. That's why. If you want to know why you're caught in a repetitive sin right now, is because you hit it the first time and it worked. So guess what? You have the desire again, you act on it again, and you hide it again. For a lot of men, this cycle continues. The problem is it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and the greater the consequences are, the harder they work to hide, pretend, and conceal. And you know that's true. Because eventually these desires and actions affect not only you, they affect your wife in your marriage. You see my list now? They affect you repetitively with your sin and other people. They affect your finances and your future. They affect actually your health and your vision and calling in this life. And you will work overtime to hide them. And let me tell you very specifically why. Here's why. In that moment between desires and actions and hiding and concealing, something happens in a man's heart. Listen carefully to this. This is important. You cannot miss this because you're going to know it's true as soon as I say it. We hide and conceal and pretend because we actually, truly love guilt and shame, and we prefer that as penance for our sin rather than actually dealing with the desire problem in the first place. Guilt and shame become this private penance dance that we do with God. And we think that if we just feel this guilt and if we feel sorry enough, that maybe it'll make it right the next time, but it doesn't. And then we just kind of get stuck again and again and again, and our guilt and shame become our penance rather than the cross of Jesus Christ. This is us taking on behavior modification and the emotional weight and burden of our sin upon ourselves. But all it does is dig a deeper hole in men's lives. And then the hole gets so deep you can't get out of it, and it becomes a very embarrassing situation. Please don't ask me to counsel you. I don't do counseling. But in very, very special situations, I have. And I will tell you, this is not pride. I will tell you very honestly, I can fix a man, his marriage, and his issues in 2 meetings. That's all it takes. Seriously, that's all it takes. This is a true story that happened to me 6 months ago. It's about a man and his wife. I knew them. They were friends of mine. We were close to them. This man was hiding pictures on his computer of a woman at work that he was secretly having an emotional affair with. These were nude pictures that he had taken of her. He had not had sex with her, but he was hiding these pictures. And his wife one day was on the computer and saw them. Within 30 minutes, she called me. She said, "Vince, can we meet with you now?" I said, "Absolutely." Went over to my office, we sat down, and here is what I saw. I saw a viciously angry woman, which is always what happens in these situations, just visibly and viciously angry. She was saying things that I didn't think this nice Christian woman could. On the other side of the couch was this guy who I had known for a very long time, who was almost unrecognizable because he was so dejected. His physical demeanor, the way that he was talking, the way he looked, it was awful, fellas. It was like demonic possession. He couldn't even put full sentences together. I actually just let her talk about the situation. I said, "How do you feel? What's happening? What actually happened? Did you suspect it?" And I told him not to say anything and just listen. And then I turned to him to give him an opportunity to talk. And after about 2 seconds, I told him, "It would be better if you just didn't say anything." Because it was bad. It was awful. And then I turned to him and I said, here's what you're going to do for 1 week. You're only going to do any and everything that your wife wants you to do. Anything. I said, anything. And I said, do you understand? And he said, yes. I said to him, if she tells you to quit your job, do it. If she says you need to cancel activities, you do it. If you need to remove yourself from the presence of this woman, you do it. And he agreed. Now I want to tell you, typically, when I look at men in these meetings, I ask them one finisher question. It's this. Is there anything else that you need to confess that you're not telling me? And 100% of the time they lie. 100% of the time they lie. They look me right in the face and they say there's nothing else. Let me be clear. It is because we have trained ourselves to pretend and hide and conceal, and we don't see any other way out. So he lied, and she went home, and there were other things, and she called me about them. Over the course of that week, this was remarkable. It was a miracle. He went and did everything that she asked. He quit his job that he had been at for over 30 years. He removed himself from the presence of this woman, and he went and had conversations with his son, who, by the way, worked in the same business with this woman. In the next meeting, they sat on the same couch. She was a little bit softer, and he was more well put together. And I asked the question, how's it going? And she spoke first, and she said some things, and I turned to him and said, how's it going? He says, I think pretty good. Wrong answer. And I said, well, what's going pretty good? And he says, well, my wife told me to quit my job. I did that, removed myself from the presence of the woman. I talked to my 2 sons about it. I feel like I'm getting my bearings. And I said, no, you're not, because I'm about to wreck your world. I said, let me ask you this question. Have you told your wife why you did it? And he didn't say anything. He just looked at me with this blank stare, like, oh, crap. Because he thought that his behavior modification was good enough to reconcile the situation. But it wasn't, because he had left undealt with the one issue on the table that was the problem for the whole issue to begin with. He was coveting another woman. He wanted an adventure, wanted to penetrate that woman, and was desperately seeking emotional connection with her and physical connection with her. But if I can just be crass, he didn't have the balls to say it. So I turned to his wife and I said to her, has he told you why yet? And she looked at me and she goes, no. I says, can I tell you why? He's afraid it's going to hurt you and destroy you, which it might. And I don't even want to tell you why, even though I know why. I said, go home, work on that, then come back. They didn't come back. Now, they are doing better in their marriage, but they never told me if they dealt with the question. Because it's not about dealing with just the shame and guilt. It's not about dealing with just the act. It's about dealing with the desires back here. The fact of the matter is, gentlemen, we desire things. We desire things that are ungodly. And it's not about doing business with the action or just the hiding and concealing and pretending. It's about doing business with the fact that we actually desire those things and addressing them. So, Paul wrote something else, which Paul begins to answer his own questions now from Romans 7 in Galatians 5. By far, one of my favorite texts from Paul of all time. Galatians 5, verses 16 all the way down to the end, about 26 or so. I'm going to read this to you, then I'm going to come back through it, and we're going to talk about it a little bit, because this is where we find hope and victory over repetitive sin, over the issue of all issues that all men deal with. It's an issue with our desires. Paul says this, but I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the desires of the flesh are against the Spirit, and the desires of the Spirit are against the flesh. For these are opposed to each other to keep you from doing the things that you want to do. Everything that he talked about in Romans 7, he's now addressing right here in Galatians 5. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. That's called freedom, by the way. Not being under the law is freedom, which is what you seek, is freedom. Now the works of the flesh are evident. Here they come, big, deep breath. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. I warn you, as I warned you before, that those who do such things will not inherit the kingdom of God. But, big but right here, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Not lawlessness, but freedom. Freedom, which is what everybody wants. It's what every man wants, is freedom. True freedom. And those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified. Crucified means kill, if you didn't know. Means put to death. Crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Hope you heard that part. Crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. If we live by the Spirit, let us also keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. This is genius level stuff here, fellas. This is all the answers to every compulsion, every addiction, every repetitive sin you've ever dealt with in your life, every moment of guilt and shame, every action that is not aligned with Jesus Christ. The answer's right here. Listen very carefully to what Paul is saying. He's saying there's a process going on. If you're an engineer, you immediately saw that in these verses, right? There's processes with inputs and outputs and things happening here, right? There's two opposing forces. There's the flesh on one side, and there's the Spirit on the other side. And then with these inputs, you get these massive lists of outputs. But these two things are at war with one another constantly, battling for each other. Flesh against spirit, spirit against flesh. One leads to bondage, the other to freedom. One produces all kinds of ugly kinds of things and behaviors in a man's life. On the other side, there is this fruit. Fruit is produce. It's a production of something, is what it is. Because when you go to the produce aisle, you're looking at the produce of something else that's happening. And right there in the middle of it all, Paul tells us the answer is found in this: desires and passions aligned with God. That's it. Now, here's the crazy part about being a man of God. Don't miss this. Is that not only does Jesus Christ save us from sin, he actually gives us the power to overcome sin in this world. Jesus doesn't stop giving at the moment of salvation. He very specifically gave us a spirit that dwells in us because he knew we weren't just going to need saving power. We were going to need sustaining power on planet Earth. And that is what differentiates a man of God from every other man. He is indwelled by the Spirit of God. Thus, when he is walking and keeping in step with and being led by the Spirit, there are outputs of that Spirit. Now, be very careful about this. It's not about focusing on producing the fruit. It's about focusing on the Spirit and his desires. and allowing our desires to be crucified so that the Spirit's desires become our desires, therefore his fruit becomes our joy, and we continue to walk, be led by, and keep in step with that Spirit. And the more and more we learn how to do this, the more the old desires go away, they are killed and crucified, and now we are taking steps with this power that indwells with us, that is a very person of God who hovered over planet Earth at the beginning of time, was present with Jesus when he was baptized, that raised Jesus from the dead, was with Jesus in every miracle he performed, dwells inside of men, but we only recognize its power when we walk, keep in step with, led by, and live by that Spirit. Not when we pretend, hide, and conceal. Pretending, hiding, and concealing is the convincing of the enemy to leave you trapped to this old way of life. All its actions and all its desires, it is bondage to this world. And the only way to discover freedom is by, number one, becoming a redeemed man of God and being renewed daily by the power of the Holy Spirit. That's it. And I want you to know that with God, there is no such thing as addiction, because God's Spirit is a bondage breaker.
That's right.
For the man who is indwelled by the Spirit of God. And that is my hope for you. Because now when I go back to all those lists of prayer requests, what I now pray for all those men is this thing: that those behaviors and bad behaviors and all the shame and the guilt that went with it will not be the only focus of their prayers. That their prayers will be this: God, replace my desires with your desires. Amen. Because that is how the first step is taken in the Spirit. It's not dealing with behaviors. It's not hiding, pretending, and concealing. It's learning how to take a step with the Spirit. But when have you ever been taught how to walk in the Spirit? Ever. I mean, we learn how to walk in the flesh, but when has anyone ever taught you how to actually walk, keep in step with, be led by, and live by the Spirit? I mean, think about it. Again, another ABT issue. Because we have these issues, fellas, and we just need to confess them to one another. But the only way to get there is to get a man to actually begin with some very remedial steps. So I'm going to tell you how to do this in a very few steps. And it's going to be super practical. It's all taken from these verses. But if you take these steps, I promise it will help you begin to take your first step with the Spirit of God and discover freedom from this old way of life. You ready for it? Here it is. Number one, you got to get honest with yourself about what you really desire. That's what I was trying to get that guy to do in that counseling session, is to say it. He couldn't say it. He couldn't say it because it was too painful. He couldn't confess it to himself, and he couldn't confess it to his wife. That's what I was trying to get my son Riley to do, is just confess it. Say what you wanted. Tell me. Because that's the only thing that's going to break shame and guilt, is a man speaking out his desires out loud, because once he says it out loud, I can actually do something with that. I know where he stands. Man, I wanted to have sex with that woman because I didn't feel powerful in our marriage. Does it hurt? Hell yeah, it hurts. It's going to suck for his wife. But that is what the enemy has convinced him to hide, that has left him in bondage and enslaved to the enemy. One guy got it. Thank you, James. You got to stop lying to yourself. And I would dare you here this weekend to say something out loud that you've been hiding in your heart, that is something that you desire, that you want, that you've been acting on, that has kept you in a prison. Amen. In bondage. Amen. and take power away from it just by saying what it is that you desire. Because then we can take step number 2. And step number 2 is this. Speak back the truth of God to that desire. Speak back God's truth to that desire. God's word has all kinds of things to say to wayward desires. In fact, the verses right there in Galatians chapter 5 have all kinds of things to say about the end of our desires, whether good or evil. But it's only until we really confess those things and decide by the power of God's word that we're going to kill that desire, actually kill it, that the behaviors begin to stop. We have to choose to crucify those old passions and desires, not by just stopping them, but step number 3, we've got to replace them with something better. And this is where a lot of Christian men go wrong. They keep working on killing and stopping, but they don't replace them with something better. Passions and desires of ours were meant to be fulfilled. That's why Jesus gave us the Spirit. It's because he knew that the Spirit was good enough to fill those passions and desires with something more righteous and holy. So you can't just stop something, you have to start something. Otherwise, you're going to go back to it time and time and time again. And once you take one of those steps in the Spirit and you discover the fruit of it, it is more intoxicating and glorifying. And the end is so much better than the desires back here that were fleeting and painful and had a rub and kept you in a prison and kept you angry and bitter, living in guilt and shame. Guys, if you can do some of these things with these issues in your life, that is where it all begins, with one conscious decision to kill the desires that are back here by confessing them, and then taking just one simple step in the Holy Spirit by his truth to see a glorifying end and allowing that Spirit to fill you and to guide you. And guess what? It is not a quick, fast process. You know how I know? Paul says, walk, walk, walk. Slow, meaningful, purposeful, daily. But the more that you walk and are led by and keep in step with and live by the Spirit, the more exciting the walk gets. The more in tune you are to the Spirit in your life. And I want to tell you this, there's hope, because those old desires will eventually go away and become so disgusting to you that you will vomit even thinking about them. Amen. They will become repulsive to you, so much so that you'll never want to go back. And then guess what happens? Your witness and testimony become a testimony of freedom to other people that are then stuck in those compulsions and passions and desires. And that is how God gives a kick in the groin to the enemy. He takes our weakness and makes it a strength and uses it against the enemy and the bondage that other men have around that sin. And fellas, you guys are sinful, I know it. I've already talked to some of you. You are experts in this thing, but you can become living examples of the Spirit, witnesses and testimonies to God's work by taking that power away from the enemy. And men have done this before us. Think about any great ministry that's ever been started on planet Earth. Most of them were started out of a man's pain, where he found victory, and then started something that brought glory to God and gave people freedom. Amen. Divorce recovery, Celebrate Recovery, Alcoholics Anonymous, Prison Fellowship, you name it. I can name 100 different ministries that were started just that way by men just like you who felt like a failure at one point and found victory by the power of the Spirit, by walking in him, and then shared that testimony with others. That is who we are, a broken body that God is redeeming by Jesus Christ and his saving power and the sustaining power of the Holy Spirit. And I want you to know that. I want you to know that because I found it. And you need to know that. It is not power that comes from me or this message. It is power that comes from the Almighty God that he wants you to know. So that when you walk away from this place, God will use you in a greater way than you've ever seen him move. Guess what happens there? Fruit is produced, all kinds of fruit. I grew up in California. It's a fruity place. You probably know that, right? I mean, my dad had in his front yard a multi-fruit tree. You know what I'm talking about, a tree that produces multiple kinds of fruit. You just graft in to the tree, produces many different kinds of fruits. I mean, we had a grapefruit and an orange and a lemon tree in the front yard that my dad had grafted in. If you live in the nutrients of the Spirit, you can produce fruit like that. But it's not about the fruit. It's about staying in the sustaining power of the Holy Spirit, walking in him so that you can produce the fruit. This is why Paul finishes this way. Very important. I just want to read this ending again. Paul says at the end of Galatians 5, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Why does he say it at the end there? Here's why he says it at the end. Because he understands that once you get an understanding of walking in the Spirit, you're always teetering on thinking that you did it and not the Spirit.
That's right.
Therefore, you will be tempted to walk into conceit and provoke and envy. But you got to walk that fine line where you always understand it's only the Spirit doing the work. It's him producing the fruit through you. It's not you doing anything, by the way, except walking by the Spirit and his lead, which is kind of crazy when you think about it, because really in this life, we don't really do that much, except sin a whole lot, and then get redeemed by a Savior and renewed by a Spirit. And I think that's a pretty special thing for us as men of God. I want you to know that. I'm so passionate about you knowing this that I want you to take a step in the Spirit today. It might begin with this, confessing your desires, confessing that stronghold. It might be by this, beginning to deal with some of the actions that came from that desire. It might be by this, taking a renewed step of the Spirit by killing and crucifying those desires and replacing them with the desires and passions of the Spirit. Take one of those steps today, literally today. Maybe you want to take one of those steps right now. Right now. And I'm going to give you the opportunity to do that as I close. Here's your opportunity. There's going to be a number of counselors that walk forward right now. If you're a counselor, can you just walk up here to the front? These guys are going to just walk up here, and they're going to be up here at the end of this message. And here's what I'm praying right now. I'm praying that as you watch these guys walk up, that your eyes and your heart are drawn to one of these men. I'm praying that if you're wanting to deal with some of these issues in your life, that you'll walk up to that man, you'll wait in his line until he is done, and that you'll take a first step in the Spirit.
Amen.
That maybe you're going to confess something, you're going to kill something, you're going to ask for prayer around something, you're going to make a decision with them that you're going to do and act upon in the coming hours. But just pick one of these guys. The one that you feel called to, walk up to them and begin a conversation. I don't even care where you begin. I'm going to go behind this tent where my table is. I'm going to wait in this back room right here. If you want to come talk to me, I will wait there. You can come talk with me. I'd be happy to do that as well. But wait in that line. Do not leave that line until you've had that very first conversation. Because our issue is this, fellas. We ain't been taught. And right now is a discipling moment for some of you. It's a first time you're ever going to do something like this. Why not do it right here with one of these guys that you don't know, where you can just pour it out and listen to their counsel as they give you some advice to take some first steps. Here's why I'm telling you to do this. Romans chapter 8, which comes after Romans chapter 7. Aren't you glad you came today to learn that? Yeah, that's right. Paul says, after all that bloviating about, I do the thing that I don't want to do, and the very thing I do want to do, I don't do. After all that, Here's what he says. There is therefore no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. Hear that. Saving power of Christ Jesus. For the low of the Spirit of life has set you free in Christ Jesus from the law of sin and death. The Spirit of life, the renewing, restoring, sustaining power of the Spirit has set you free from the law of sin and death. For God has done what the law, weakened by the flesh, could not do by sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin, he condemned sin in the flesh in order that the righteous requirement of the law might be fulfilled in us who walk, there it is again, who walk not according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh have set their minds on things of the flesh, but those who live according to the Spirit have set their minds on things of the Spirit. Let's pray. God, as we close our time here, we are stewing on some of the things that are dancing around in our mind right now. I hope our own sin and compulsions and actions and shame and guilt. God, we are tired of living under the condemnation of these sins, the repetitive action and living under the law. We are men that desire freedom today. Freedom, not just freedom that you provided through your death and resurrection, but freedom by walking and knowing and living in and being led by your Spirit. God, while many of us have experienced that saving power, we need the sustaining power of the Spirit. We have quenched your Spirit for too long. We confess that. And our testimony to this today is going to be us walking forward to confess, repent, and receive prayer. God, we pray that this moment will be a divine and holy moment. A commitment not between us and another man, a commitment between us and you that we're making to another man in order to find a pathway forward. God, these are your men on your mission for your glory. I just really pray today that they will not quench the call to come. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.